Those were the days.
Hey everyone, Justin Lee Howard here with another edition of Those Are the Days Extended. And today we are actually going to talk about one of our favorite couples here. We're going to take a little bit of a deep dive with Kate and Roman, and I'm actually going to take you back to April 28th, 2005, when Kate and Roman reunited. Those of you who don't remember from the stills of this photo, this is actually when they reunited after the Meliswan, New Salem stalker storyline where Roman was believed to have been killed off and then um, eventually was brought back with all the other residents. But this is him and Kate actually sort of reuniting right at the Salem airport here. Funny thing, if you don't remember this, literally 5 minutes before these stills, Kate had literally just accepted John's proposal for marriage because while Roman and Marlena were believed to be dead for the better part of a year, Kate and John actually got together and had a very short-lived but impactful romance, and they had, like I said, just got engaged right before um, Roman and Marlena showed up and sort of surprised them with being alive. So that's why you see a little bit of a stunned face here on Lauren Koslow as Kate here. But yeah, this sort of inspired me to take a little bit of a deep dive into the Roman and Kate sort of relationship. It's one that spanned, I don't know, 20 something years now from when it originally started. Um, these two have been a very unlikely couple, especially specifically in the beginning of their courtship or their first time around when they started dating and eventually married. And that was actually back in 2002. Roman and Kate started dating. Again, incredibly unlikely pairing, especially back then, because Kate was, she was the sophisticated bad girl we sort of loved, and not necessarily love to hate, but just loved. And then, she was a morally great character most times, but and then you had Roman, who was the quintessential good guy. He had sort of come across as being sort of second place to the John and Marlena relationship in their sort of love saga. But yeah, again, his main trait was being a cop and it being, the good guy, the all around good guy. So sort of putting them together was very, I think, very inspired at the time. They had a lot to sort of consider with putting them together. It was, they numerous factors. They had the I wouldn't say issue, but they had the subtext of Marlena, and Marlena is Roman's ex-wife, and then this they don't always get to talk about, and it's something that I wish that they would highlight a lot more is the Kate and Marlena friendship, and the fact that these two women basically kind of grew up together or are such old friends from when they were so young that it doesn't get a lot of attention. I wish it would. Every once in a while, we'll get like a scene of them together every couple of years or so, and they're at lunch or something, and it just sort of snaps you back into it and reminds you that they are close friends and that they have such history together and that they sort of knew each other, especially not Austin and Billy, but especially before even Sammy and Lucas were born, that they were friends and very close and confidants to each other. So we don't get to see a lot of that play out um, in modern day, but yeah, it's nice when it's referenced, and hopefully, with the new writers, it's something that they'll focus on a little bit more. That these two have such a rich history, but because of that, that was a factor. It was just the Marlena of it all. She's her good friend. She's his ex-wife. Not to mention the biggest obstacle was, of course, at the time was the ongoing Kate and Sammy feud. That was, I'd say, back then 2002 was probably the biggest thing that they had to sort of get over. It was sort of Kate sort of having to also realize that she needed to play a little bit more nicer with Sammy if she was going to really be with Roman, and to take that into consideration. And Roman sort of caught in the middle of these two sort of spitfire women, one his new girlfriend slash fiance who he wants to build a life with, and then of course his Hurricane Sammy of a daughter. So that took a lot of attention for their romance. Like I said, it was the biggest obstacle of them getting together outside of, the instant sort of opposites attract of who they are. But there was definitely chemistry back then with them. And another factor I want to bring up that a lot of people may not remember this, or if you weren't watching at the time, but another factor in this relationship was actually Billy, which again we know is Kate's daughter. But she also had this short-lived romance with Roman back in the day, and it happened during the kind of like the Maison Blanche, sort of after, directly after. It was kind of in the middle of the Maison Blanche storyline, and before we got really into like the Princess Gina part of that storyline. Again, remember that saga was years of storyline, so it was sort of right in the middle, and it was they sort of put these two characters together because they were pairing up a lot of the couples, and they were sort of on the hunt for Stefano. And if you remember back then, Josh Taylor was fairly new to the show, but they had him sort of go along with it was Bo and Hope, it was John and Marlena, it was Abe and Lexi, and then they had Billy and Roman, and they sort of put Billy and Roman sort of together, sort of as partners, but they had this sort of short-lived romance together. And actually, one of when Lisa Rinna sort of came back, I think maybe early on, not the first stint, but when she had come back again in the early 2000s. Actually, it was right before this. I think she came on in 2001 for something short-lived, or early 2002. And I remember this scene before she left. Her and Josh Taylor's Roman were having this goodbye scene, and it was very nice and very friendly. And it was like, oh, they're just they're having him send Billy off. And then it delved into, they sort of remarked on their history, and Billy basically sort of gave Roman permission to date Kate because I think he was a little apprehensive about dating her after he had been with Billy, even though the Billy relationship was very short-lived at the time. But yeah, if you can find it on YouTube, it's Lisa Rinna and Josh Taylor. It's a really, really sweet scene, and she sort of senses that he's a little nervous or trepidatious about it, and she sort of, in her Lisa Rinna, Billy Reed fashion, sort of lets him know it's completely okay. She knows that he's into her mother, and she sort of gives their blessing for him to go after Kate, and Roman eventually takes that and spearheads him sort of really, really going after Kate and establishing a relationship with her. So I say Billy wasn't a big factor, but she definitely was a consideration, especially for Roman back then, on whether or not he would actually pursue Kate. Then when these two actually got together, again, Roman was in a place of finally sort of accepting John and Marlena and closing out that chapter of his life. Remember when Josh Taylor came on the show as Roman, it was when they sort of brought him back. He was gone for a few years after he officially divorced Marlena, and this was after him catching the infamous John and Marlena affair. They decided to bring Roman back. They brought him back in the form of Josh Taylor, and then he had this a lot of this mix up about sort of thinking Marlena was available and he was sick, and then he had this sort of pseudo alliance with Kristen, and she was sort of using him to kind of break up John and Marlena, and he sort of kind of fell into that and got used to the idea of getting Marlena back. And so this is post all that. This is him sort of over Marlena, and then I think with Kate, she was in an interesting place at this time too. She had ended things with Victor. They ended horribly. Remember, they were sort of becoming enemies. She tried to kill him. He wanted to get rid of her. He cut her off. Then she went, if you remember, went to go work at the diner where we were introduced to her. We were introduced to Hattie, actually. And so they had that storyline. And then it picks up, they sort of get together right when she's getting her life back together. And then she has this new job at, what do you know, John Black is starting this sort of newer company, and he's looking for someone to run it for him, and therefore he sort of enlists Kate back then to run, and that was Basic Black, and that was sort of the start of that. So this is, Roman's in a place of moving on with his life, and Kate is on the upswing of getting her life back together after sort of ending things officially with Victor. And so they sort of met in the middle and kind of came together. And again, it was the quintessential opposites attract. We saw that play out back then, but again, a likely pairing that I think a lot of us were rooting for. It was like, okay, well, what's going to happen with Roman, and where's Kate going to go if she's not with Victor? And sort of putting them together was very ingenious and a really good idea. So yeah, moving on, we had sort of this second iteration of them together, and of course, again, we know how it eventually ended. It ended in travesty with, oh, excuse me, it ended in travesty with Kate and sort of Roman. Where we at? Here we go. With this infamous scene here when Kate comes in from their wedding and she is drenched in blood because she has found Roman, who has been killed by the Salem stalker, who eventually we find out was Marlena. So that was sort of the end of their first round. Again, I mentioned it in the first picture of them being reunited after this fact, Roman coming back, but it wasn't smooth sailing from then on. And we'll get into that in a minute of why it wasn't so easy for them to just kind of pick up. I think the Salem stalker storyline was great for days, but it put a nail in the coffin for this relationship in a lot of ways. And we'll see that coming up, because what happened was while they were away, or while Kate, excuse me, not Kate, while Marlena and Roman were away, these two people sort of found comfort in each other. And this was the saga of John and Kate, which I loved. If you may not remember, it was a very short-lived but very impactful romance that sort of came out of again the Salem Stalker, the Mela Swan storyline, where Roman and Marlena are off on the island. Kate and John are sort of grieving them and trying to move on with their lives. There was a lot that happened with this. With them sort of getting together, it was sort of a whirlwind, a little bit of a romance that was sort of rooted in grief. Basically, it was a little bit of a slow burn. Again, they were grieving over their dead spouses. And then this also coincided with the Stan storyline, where, if you remember, while trying to rescue the people from Meliswan, John had actually hurt his back. And when he hurt his back, he was prescribed painkillers. He ended up getting addicted to them. And then the infamous character of Stan, ended up basically pushing the drugs on John, and he became addicted to them, if you remember, at that time. And it was actually really Kate who sort of worked with him and got him over that, and got him over, or they both got each other over their grief of Marlena and Roman at this time. So yeah, this for me will probably go down as one of my favorite pairings. Again, it was very short-lived, but really impactful. I loved these two together. It was sort of one of those, moment in time things where, not saying I necessarily would want Kate and John over maybe even Marlena and John, or Kate and Roman, but it just happened at the perfect time. These two characters sort of needed each other and came together, and I think their romance was very sweet and loving. And what else would they? Kate again helped him with his recovery, and then the conflict that they had during this time was they sort of did this little bit of a role reversal. I think in the John and Marlena relationship, Sammy had always been sort of a thorn in their relationship, and it always created conflict, if not directly between them, for their family. And I think the writers, powers that be, were trying to recreate that in this relationship by giving John and Kate sort of a conflict outside of their grief. And that was, at the time, it ended up weirdly and oddly being Belle, because at this time, Belle and Philip's relationship was sort of breaking apart. And because of that, Belle sort of became Kate's number one enemy. It wasn't Sammy at this time. It sort of became Belle, because of, Kate sort of felt like Belle was taking advantage of Philip, or had played him, and, had used him to make Sean jealous and what have you. And, they were going through their saga at the time. So they were sort of at opposite sides, where Kate and John are coming together in this new relationship, and John is very dependent on Kate at the time for his recovery. And then Belle's coming in, and her and Kate are at odds and going at it, and it's sort of John in the middle in an interesting way. It's sort of, again, it was a flip of the usual John Marlena, with Marlena in the middle of John and Sammy, and now we have in this iteration with Kate and John, he is sort of in the middle of his new love, which is Kate, and then of course his daughter, which is Belle. So yeah, that was sort of the main conflict there. Eventually, like I said, Marlena and Roman did come back. They were reunited, like I mentioned in that first slide that I showed you. Let me see, one second, bring it back to this slide. So when they did come back, John and Marlena, excuse me, John and Kate sort of made the decision, kind of, but also it was like, sort of, where do we go from here? So they decided to end their relationship and sort of go back to their partners. I think here it ended up being a little bittersweet because, again, um, John was so thankful and grateful to have Marlena back. That was an easier transition to get those two back together. But I think with Kate and Roman, since their relationship was fairly new, I mean, they were together, they had gotten married that day, but again, Roman was killed and taken that on their wedding day. So they never got a chance to live as a married couple. So I think their relationship had a little bit more strain to it. So when Roman came back, it was sort of, there was this weird sort of tension, and then Kate still has these viable feelings for John. And I urge you, if you can find it on YouTube, again, things get scrubbed so often, but find it on YouTube. There's this beautiful, really sweet breakup scene where uh before Marlena moves back into the penthouse, Kate, of course, is living there because she's with John. And it's her, after they decide to go back to their spouses, Marlena and Roman, Kate is packing up her stuff, and they sort of have this sort of breakup goodbye scene with her and John. And again, if you can find it, I urge you to watch it. It's really sweet. It's just two adults coming together and realizing that they're in this weird situation and that they really do care about each other, but it's probably best that they end this relationship and not make it a conflict and go back to their previous spouses. So I think it's, the writing is sort of really great, and Drake and Lauren are just amazing in it. So go check it out. Again, like I said, it's a relationship that was short lived for the most part in the grand scheme of these two sort of being on stage or being on screen over the years. But I just think it was a very, very impactful relationship that it doesn't get mentioned a lot. Every once in a while, Kate will mention is, being with John, or John will say something nice about Kate that sort of makes you remark that they were once a couple and actually in love with each other. So yeah, so that was sort of kind of how that the first go round of Kate and Roman sort of ended for real. Soon after that, even though Kate went back to Roman after this, their relationship just didn't survive. It just didn't work out, which for the better at the time. I think splitting them up after putting them together, it was one of those right time, right moment kind of things, and the moment had left by the time Roman came back on screen and was back in Salem. But we pick this up now. I want to say, God, we're almost about 20 years later, and then this is the second time around for Kate and Roman, and that is, of course, in 2023, where the writers decide to put them together again, which I think at the time Kate had been sort of in and out of Canvas a little bit, and so we're remarking a lot, if you watch our show, where's Kate, and why don't we get the old Kate back, and where is she? And I think they sort of brought her back and made her front and center. And Josh Taylor, of course, he had been sort of designed to just sort of running the pub and kind of having these brief interactions with characters whenever it suited him, but they weren't really using him like they should have, or to his full potential. And I think the powers that be deciding to do another go round of Kate and Roman, I think really worked out. They're both at just different places in their life. I think Kate in this iteration, as we've seen, is a little bit more tame. She's still herself, but we've seen a little bit of a maturity with her. And I think when it comes to Roman, we do see and feel she has a real love and respect for him. And I think a love and respect for the Brady name and what it is to be Brady. And I think they've showed us that over the last couple of years about how she interacts with people, how she chooses or doesn't choose when she wants to sort of scheme or get into some trouble, or ultimately make the right decision. So I think we've got a little bit more of a tamer Kate. She's still Kate, as we see, but yeah, I think she, like I said, she's being with Roman. She's taking this again second go around a little bit more serious. And I think with the Roman character, not only is it bringing him to the forefront of putting him with such a dynamic character like Kate, but I think they've made him a little less, holier than thou and a little less quintessential good guy. We see he can be a little bit more devious when he wants to be. The stuff about um, or when we had the storyline about Phillips faking his death, and Kate knew about it, and of course she trusted Roman with that information, and he made the decision to be on her side and keep it a secret. And the Roman of 20 years ago would have sort of never done that. He would have sort of been on the side of justice and telling the truth. So we got a Roman, a little bit more of a devious Roman in his older age, and now we're seeing it play out a little bit in modern time with the whole EJ shooting, where we're watching and seeing what, if any, involvement he had in it. And so again, we're getting a Roman that's a little bit not afraid to get his hands dirty, we'll say. So yeah, and I think what really helped sell this sort of second time around for Kate and Roman is when they had the death storyline. I think we saw really them come together as a couple and a married couple in the way Kate sort of took care of, or excuse me, Roman sort of took care of Kate when she was sick, and then that death storyline, what it did to him as a person before. Of course, we saw them sort of resurrected and brought back. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this couple. I think the thing they did right by not just putting them together at this stage of life, but really giving them a romance. We saw them sort of court each other. We saw Kate have some doubt about doing another go round with Roman, and the writers have really shown us how these two characters have changed and matured in the past 20 years, so that they're at a place now where they can come together and being a loving relationship. And I'm here for it. I hope they keep them together for the duration. I hope that their end game, I like their interaction. I like seeing Kate as a Brady and having those interactions. The stuff with Johnny we've seen. I think that is a direct result of her being married to Roman and her being at that sort of station in life and place in the family. I really like that. I like the fact that, they're older now and they have their kids who they have from other relationships. Then they have their shared kids. We have yet to see Cassie, but we've seen a lot of interaction with Rex over the years, and sort of bringing them together and seeing them as parents to him, at least. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this couple. Hopefully, like I said, their end game. Hopefully, we can continue to see them on screen and mixing it up with everyone else. And yeah, as it should be. I think Lauren and Josh are such talented actors, and they work so well together. So yeah, here's to more Roman and Kate. So yeah, that was this week's edition of Those Were the Days, and I will actually see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.
Those were the